Hi, thank you for coming to today's session on 5 key strategies for delivering FYE in a post-pandemic world. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be sent out tomorrow. You'll receive it in your email. This webinar is brought to you by Human eSources. Human eSources is a worldwide leader in the development and provision of online assessments and personal development programs. You can learn more at humanesources.com. And today I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Nick Rabinovich, Human eSources Director of Product Research and Development. He'll be sharing how to maintain effectiveness during the pandemic, from classroom to remote learning, and keeping your sanity while you're doing so. Here at Human eSources, Nick oversees the educational content of our products and supporting resources. He works closely with educational research consultants and performs his own research to continually improve our current suite of products. He's worked in the online education and career development field since 2003. And prior to that, Nick spent 7 years as a high school teacher and has also worked in a medical research lab. Nick has bachelor degrees in science and education. Welcome to today's call, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you for the glowing introduction as well. Appreciate it. Yeah, and thanks to everyone out there who's attending. We appreciate your time, of course, and I know that time can be short even in good times, and I know we're not necessarily in the best of times right now, but so I just wanted to express that appreciation. So today I plan to be brief. I know we booked an hour, but we did this once before and managed to keep it closer to a half hour. So I do want to be sensitive to time, and we're going to really just hit on 5 key strategies that we've discovered through learning of some of the people that we work with and what's been effective for them throughout this pandemic and its impact. And hopefully we're coming more to the tail end. I know things are starting to look better now, so but we know that there are some permanent changes that are going to occur as a result of this. Online learning was already, in the beginning of its takeoff long before the pandemic started, but it seemed to have ramped things up and sure to continue going forward. And there are some positives to that, but of course there are some obstacles that we hope to, with these key strategies, overcome. So just wanted to get that out of the way. Of course, Tamara already introduced me, Nick Rabinovich. So just on a global sense, I threw this slide in here just to get a sense that, we're not in this alone. Everybody's being affected. In fact, where we are in North America is probably doing much better than a lot of places around the world. But school closures happened everywhere, and that has had a major impact. And specifically, if you look at the bottom of the slide there, individuals choosing a gap year in terms of their academic education, not going to college or university out of high school. And just that impact itself means they've given up about $90,000 in lifetime earnings. So, just that one simple fact, and there's obviously many more than that, but that one simple fact has had a major long-lasting impact. And so we want to prevent that delay in education by providing education in whatever modality we can. And so that's really one of the aims of us as educators. And as Tamara mentioned, I was an educator at the time, but I still consider myself an educator. I just help a lot of other educators with what they do. So these are just some highlights of things that we've noticed through our research and just through reading what's out there in terms of that faculty are struggling. And as a result, considered even changing their career, retiring. I mean, it's like stressful at the best of times, but this is not the best of times. So also just finding resources. The resources that worked before in the previous environment don't necessarily work now. And having to use additional resources, which you've never used before, that's a learning curve. Also disengaged students, if they're not physically there, it makes them easier for them to be not mentally there too. And then just that personal connection, that's a big part of education, making that personal connection with students, that often gets lost. And I threw that others in there, and this is a time when I think we have, is this where we can have the poll, Tamara, where we can see how people have been impacted? I think we're going to throw a poll out there too.
Sure. Let's launch that.
Yeah. So if anyone want to make their selections, how has it affected your teaching?
I'll share the results.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there you have the results. So we have a small audience, so unfortunately we didn't get a lot of data in there, but we know that, considering other careers is a real thing. One might feel safer because you're not physically interacting with as many people. Number two, just that lost connection with the students where it's really hard. Obviously right now we're trying to connect to an audience and it's not easy. You feel more like a talking head and throwing ideas out into the ether, and you're not sure how those ideas are absorbed or considered. So those are definitely things we're going to try to address with these 5 key strategies that I'm going to talk about. So it's good to know that we're all kind of struggling along, and maybe as a result we can find solutions together. And for sure, I encourage anyone today, if they have found something that has worked to overcome something even real small, please feel free to share. That's part of the point of us coming together on this, is being able to share ideas and resources. So the 5, I've kind of teased it a little bit, too much already, but in terms of addressing COVID, which really in this case, for the most part, is online teaching, but we'll try to go beyond that as well. Remaining true to standards. So every educator knows that in order to be effective, you have to have certain learning standards or learning outcomes that you meet, and those learning outcomes are usually well researched in terms of having long-lasting impact, whether it someone being more employable, someone being more healthy, someone just being a better citizen, contributing citizen to society. Those learning outcomes have been chosen very carefully, or prerequisites to further education, for example. So those remaining true to those standards. Sometimes when you're scrambling for additional resources, you may end up losing standards along the way, but we hope to show you today that you can still cover all the standards that exist and do it in a different way. Consolidating resources. You tend to grab it at more resources when your teaching gets thrown off and your environment gets thrown off because you're trying to meet those different needs, but you try to fight that urge and try to rather consolidate resources. Just pick the right resources for the purpose rather than try to use too many. Obviously, increased learning curve, confusion, onboarding time, that type of thing. So it's best to consolidate these resources. Use resources that are student-centered. That's the third one. So what that means is students can manage themselves better with the resource. The resources are more self-explanatory, they're more engaging, they're not ones that require a lot of help or professional supervision in terms of them being used. So it's really important to pick student resources that are student-centered and allow that student to move along a little bit at their own pace maybe, or at least in a way that they can manage themselves to some degree. Staying personal. This one's one of the tougher ones. So there are resources out there that definitely can provide that sense of this is personal for me. What I'm learning relates to me personally and knows a little bit about it. There are resources that can do that. To try to go too generic, to use resources that are one size fits all, in other words, can make students feel even more alienated than they already are through the pandemic. So having something that feels like, oh, this was kind of tailor-made to me, or this at least allows me to choose things that are my personal preferences, are really important now because of that increased distance in other areas. So that's the fourth thing that we're going to talk about in more detail. And then finally, feedback rich. If it feels like the student's just throwing work into a bottomless pit and then they don't know how things are going until an end point, that can be really disheartening. And having something that gives them immediate feedback in a very consistent and frequent manner is really important, again, because of that further distance. So having that, did I do this right? Did I do this right? The teacher can always be right there to provide that. And so if a resource can help with that, then that's all the better. So those are the 5, and I just sort of introduced those topics. I'll get in a little more detail about ways to do that. And I'm also going to admittedly talk about a resource that our company provides called CollegeScope, and it's one that we used in this particular case study that I'm going to go through at South Louisiana. But of course, the main premise, those 5 key points, can be applied to any resource that you choose. We hope you walk away from the webinar today with some extra tools in your tool basket, not necessarily have to use the resources that we're selling So we're hoping to help people regardless of whether they become our customers or not. South Louisiana College, obviously in the South, starting at the beginning of the pandemic, they were trying to address it. They had a resource that was ours called CollegeScope. It's basically an online course, somewhere in between a textbook and a course, but all online and self-managed, so students can go through it. But of course, the instructors at South Louisiana could help and be the sort of guide on the side, to use a term that's often used. And they were using it well before COVID hit, but they found that when COVID did hit, it became very useful for several reasons that I'll get into. So they agreed they needed a single resource that would integrate with their existing learning management system, which happened to be Canvas. So that's another part of that, consolidating your resources. Having something that students have to go elsewhere, to pick out pieces is difficult. So something that integrates with existing systems is critical, and that's what this particular resource did for them. It included all the supplemental resources. So things like, help guide, instructor manual, syllabi, test banks, even PowerPoints that could help when there was synchronous learning time, that could be used. Supplemental lessons, all that was included. It wasn't something that they had to build over time. It was already ready to go. So any resource that comes with all that is going to be much more helpful than something that you're sort of having to build all that supplemental stuff on your own. And it does map to recognized standards. That's another key component. It wasn't just sort of a homegrown, this is what I think is best because the one person built it. It was built by a committee sort of thing, but also adhered to recognized standards, things like CAS standards, CAS, the Council for Advancement of Higher Standards in Higher Education. I always have trouble with that acronym, as well as CASEL, social emotional learning standards, which are published out there that we know have a significant impact with students. And of course, it had to be student-centered. Like I said, they couldn't necessarily help every single student one-on-one all the time. So having something that acted a little bit like that, but allowed for instructors to be the guide on the side, again, was what their focus was. And that's CollegeScope, the resource that we provide, happened to meet all those needs, but there are many out there that probably could also meet those needs. So what were the results? The results after 2016-27 academic year, obviously before COVID, they had over 2,000 students go through it, and they experienced a 17-point increase between what we call the pre and post chapter confidence scores. So before, this is divided up in chapters, much like a textbook. Before each, they were surveyed on the learning outcomes, their confidence level, and then again at the end of the chapter to measure if there was a difference made over the course of the chapter. And those scores were also correlated to the proper objective quiz scores, whether they actually learned the material. And because of that high correlation that we saw, we knew that not only were the students learning the learning outcomes and meeting those learning outcomes, they were aware of that. So there's that sort of student-centered piece that I've mentioned already, where they know what they're learning, they know why they're learning it, and they know why it's important. And so their confidence increases as a result. And so that's that, student-centered piece that I mentioned. Yeah, so that was great results. We're really happy with that. And those results pretty much continued on. I know we're going to be publishing another paper at some point that will be a little more up to date. I mean, this was about 5 years ago. So we do these studies every 5 years or so. So we should be kind of some new numbers. But we have seen similar results at other colleges, College Southern Idaho, for example. Okay, so a little more on remaining true to standards. Like I mentioned, we mapped out this curriculum to CAS standards, but any resource that maps directly to standards is going to be beneficial. Then you're meeting those standards, and you also know when you get the grades or the reports back on each section of the resource that which standards are being met, maybe which standards aren't being met as well, so you know what areas to address. So that mapping is really critical. In fact, we have a nice grid. It's almost in spreadsheet format where you can see each of the learning outcomes and what section of the resource is addressing that learning outcome. So it's not just a list of learning outcomes that go, I hope somewhere in this resource we've covered this learning outcome. You know exactly where they should be meeting that learning outcome and what content relates to each learning outcome. The other thing that is really critical for making sure you remain true to standards is doing it in multiple ways. So what you see on the right side of the slide there is we're saying that the learning outcomes are explicitly stated to everyone involved, all the stakeholders, whether that is an administrator at the institution, the instructor, and the students themselves. At the start of every section, they're saying, here's what you're supposed to be learning, you know, and at the end, it's stated again, here's what you've just learned. Did you actually learn those things? So we actually asked the students, did the content you just reviewed address the learning outcomes that we claimed that they did? So that we're making sure that, yeah, this stuff is addressing learning outcomes. We're not just, you know, guessing that they are. And it's measured objectively, of course, through the test. So we compare all those scores so they know that we are addressing the standards properly. And I'm sorry, I'm using that word standards and learning outcomes interchangeably. I know there's sometimes nuanced differences, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to use that interchangeably. I just want to pause here a little bit because I know I can speak very quickly, and just going to see, has there been any questions, or does anybody have any questions? And like I said, feel free to take yourself off of mute if you want to ask verbally. Nope. And so critical, make sure you're mapping the learning outcomes, make sure you're trying to measure that as best you can. Make sure you're asking, the students should have some form of saying that, yes, this is meeting the learning outcomes that you're telling me this is supposed to meet. So here are the links. I don't even need to go to the website independently. So let's see if I can jump to that link. So in this case, we have actually 2 crosswalks, depending on what your time frame is that you would be teaching a course in FYE. So either 8 weeks or 14 weeks. Let's look at the 14-week thing. That tends to be more popular. This is guided pathways, which we know is popular out west. So apologize to the people who've never seen guided pathways, but this is one form of standards or learning outcomes that can met, and it'd be all mapped out here, nicely done, where, you know, in weeks 1 and 2, here's what I should be looking for, different highlights, you know, overall topics, and a little bit of plan around implementation. And that would be repeated again in different weeks. So it's nicely laid out in terms of making sure you're meeting learning outcomes with the resource itself. This is not the resource, by the way. This is just a map of the resource to those guided pathway learning outcomes. And then more of a checklist. So this is a little bit of that consolidated resource that I talked about. Everything is included. It's not just, here's something you can use, but you figure out how, and you figure out why it works, and, you know, you figure out all the reporting and everything. It's all built in. And I mentioned CAS before, and there's also, we'd also address in our particular one, may not be part of everybody's FYE program, but I know it's handled at either at some place in the university, but there is content addressing Title IX and Campus Safe. So here's an overview of a consolidated resource, our consolidated resource in this case, but any one that may be used, and it's probably similar when it comes to FYE. There's a component of self-awareness, which of course is right up front, and that's what helps keep it personal. I mentioned that as one of the key 5 key strategies. And part of that self-awareness, actually, in our particular resource, is self-assessment, a full, validated, and reliable psychometric assessment around personality type, another one around multiple intelligences, another one around we call skills, but it really refers to employability and academic skills. So it encompasses quite a few skills in there. And that component brings that personal. So they learn about themselves in the beginning, and then they're able to apply what they learn about themselves as the students to remaining chapters. You can see here. So of course, you know, how can I get ready for college based on what I know about myself now in terms of my personality, my multiple intelligence profile, my skill set, and of course, what kind of careers would be good, you know, best ways to plan and make decisions, etc. I don't need to read out the whole slide to you, but this would be an overview of the 9 major chapters or sections or units that would be included in this particular resource. And not just a flat resource in terms of text. This is interactive, so it has built-in testing, journaling where the students are reflecting and writing, and that content can be reviewed by their instructors and have feedback provided to them. videos, everything from TED Talks and more, different activity guides as they go through. Like I said, integration with LMS. So again, consolidated. It's all built into one spot. This is a good point where I'm actually going to jump into a live version of what that resource looks like. So what is a consolidated resource? That sounds like a lot. How would students absorb all of this? But it's laid out very straightforward, and that's where that similarity to a textbook comes in, because everybody knows, you basically start on page 1 and keep moving forward. So this is a Canvas system. This is just a testing environment that we have to help our technology team make sure everything is working properly. But this would be the same thing sort of in Moodle or Blackboard or D2L or most other LMS systems out there. So the chapters that I mentioned would be pulled in as assignments. So Canvas uses assignments as sort of units of learning material. And chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and so on were all pulled in from this resource, and now basically can be interfaced entirely within the Canvas or learning management system environment. As well, you see this little discussion boards assignment, and that did not come from our resource. That was created separately, but can be pulled into one place. So if you've got your own materials as an instructor, you can integrate any materials that you have, as long as they are in Canvas, and just dispersed however you want, alongside that material, which makes it really nice. So it's like you can mash together all the resources that you're trying to use your students in one place, and that makes things really easy. And it's pretty easy to create additional materials if you've got an LMS system, as you probably already know. Now, if I'm here acting as a student, so I'll just quickly show you what it's like to jump in. I've already done some work in here. That's why I have a score already. So I know that I've done work in here. I've got 8 out of 10, 20, 9 out of 10, so on. And another thing I should mention is no matter what you set the scoring here in the environment, it'll work with the external components as well. But I'll click on that. And now I go in and I'm immediately in the resource. So this would be an example of that pre-survey of knowing how confident I am as a student before I start this chapter on goal setting and planning around the learning outcomes. So here are some learning outcomes that are part of this resource. You get this level of confidence everywhere from 0 up to 100. I've already submitted this. They continue on, and they get a little intro, key questions, breaking it down into fewer points just to make sure, and a little bit of a chapter summary. It's a little more text, and this is an integration of an assessment. This is where I say keep it personal. So we have a personality assessment, which goes by the name, actually, True Talent Personality, AchieveWorks Personality. There's 2 different flavors of the same thing, but they're both personality assessments. And it's pulling in the one dimension that knows if you're a thinker or more of a feeler. This student, after they took the assessment, was more on the feeler side. So now they are recommended a video based on the fact that they're a feeler. So this has been personalized. My instruction is personalized to me. I know I'm a feeler, so I'm going to view this video. If I was on the other side, I would have viewed this video. Now I get my little interactive piece where I get to respond based on that after they've watched the video, and this would open up right over top. You can see it just comes in right here. I don't want to mess up the sound here, so I'm just going to close that right away, but it would just appear right there all in one place, and they would reflect what they learned from that video. So nice little integration there. I'm going to just one more page to show you. Here's where I said explicitly stating the learning objectives. Students know exactly, and you notice I highlighted that. That's another ability. This is part of that feedback where I can interact with it. I can highlight things just like a real textbook, and if I logged out and logged back, I'd be able to see that again. So everything integrated in one place, like I said. Okay, jump back to the PowerPoint real quick. Student-centered. So as you saw there, I can go through that as a student without needing a lot of instructor interaction, quite a bit. I can, view those videos, I can journal, I can do those activities where I get immediate feedback. I got this right or wrong. But there are components where instructors also provide feedback. We don't exclude instructors entirely out of this. This is more meant as a supplement, of course. But this is actual quotes from real customers we had as students going through the resource. saying how, you know, they like certain things, how I was interactive, and how I was able to go through on my own and not need help at every point along the way. So, and made it feel a little bit more personalized as well. If you read into things like, you know, one quiz reinforced the choice I had made, so it felt personalized to the student. Just pausing to allow people to read as they want. Okay, so I jumped ahead on the demo point. This was a slide I put in to remind me to go into the demo, but I think I've shown you already from the student side what it was, but now is a good time for me to show you a little bit of what it would look like from the instructor side, and it's not a whole lot different. So I'll jump back over to that. And the other thing I should mention in terms of the highlighting too, there's also the ability to take notes. So if I wanted to say, you know, remember this for test, it's all there, and then I can see it. So it's just like they have their own little notes that they can put on in the margins of their textbook sort of thing. But I'm going to jump out back to my instructor view, which shows a very similar layout, except now I can see who has completed particular areas. So I know that sample student who I was just acting like has not yet completed that chapter, but I'll go back to chapter 3 and say, okay, well, that sample student has completed it. I've already graded it, but we'll see what that looks like if I were going to grade a particular student. It nicely summarizes anything that I would need to review as an instructor rather than having to go through their entire work from beginning to end. These are the areas that I would be reviewing. So these are the open-ended answers typically that were answered throughout the chapter, all consolidated in one place. And I can apply a grade based on my review of that. In this case, out of 10, I can provide comments to the student that they can see immediately. And I can also even create a little rubric, and that's what this grading notes field is. So if I wanted to make myself consistent, which obviously is a good thing, I can create a little rubric for each of the chapters in this case, or each of the activities if I wanted to, and be able to flip through the students quickly. I can also see anything that was auto-scored, because there are many things in a resource that are auto-scored, which is nice. And that's that immediate feedback that we talked about before. So the student knows immediately after completing any quiz or activity what score they got on it. So that's pretty critical. But as an instructor, this is all consolidated in one place. And I would just move on to the next student for each activity. So pretty straightforward. I mentioned keeping it personal. In this case, we had the 4 validated assessments, but whatever technique that you can find out there to make sure this personal student that they're getting something that it feels like, oh, this is tailored to me. We happen to do it in these 4 different areas: personality, intelligences, learning, productivity, and skills. Learning productivity is sort of the next evolution of a learning style inventory, if you've heard of that before. And we've modernized that much more than where it used to be in terms of understanding that learning styles are not, you know, one and done sort of thing. And that's good to develop multiple modalities of learning, and this addresses that. Skills, like I mentioned, covers sort of academic and employability type skills. Multiple intelligence relates to Gardner's theory, but this is something that helps keep it personal. So implementing that as part of a post-pandemic strategy is really important. Here's a little bit more about personalizing it. A little survey, determine their needs. So it can be small, like this, just a quick little survey of understanding students, or it can be large, like this, fully validated psychometric assessments in this case, wherever you can implement that. Feedback rich. So I mentioned we have a mix of things that are auto-scored or provide automated feedback based on a computer algorithm. In this case, you'd see something like this, or something that's more manual, where it's capturing open-ended answers from students. The instructors are providing grades and comments through an interface, in this case directly in a learning management system to make it easy. You don't have to search for things. It's automated in terms of reminding students, hey, you haven't done this yet, it was due today. So anything that can help manage that for you all in one place is going to make a big difference, keeping that feedback going with the students, understanding, when those students tend to drop off, you get those sort of early warning signs very quickly when you're seeing that. Pause again, because we're getting close to the end. Any questions so far from the audience? Again, you could take yourself off of mute or submit the question right in the chat. And Tamara, just notify me if you happen to see anything in there, because my eyes are darting from screen to screen here.
Yeah, I just see a question of what do you recommend as your top tip to engage students?
Good question. So in terms of engaging students, yeah, video seems to do a good job at this point, but short. We live in sort of a Twitter world of, minimum characters or, short little videos, but including a few short videos, especially as a sort of, I call them a motivation check at the beginning of a lesson, can kind of engage students to be more willing to engage in deeper, more longer material afterwards. So the other thing is sort of keeping it personal. That part about, what does this mean to me? So what does this mean to me in my life? Students come from different areas, they've all been through different situations. Some are really struggling with the pandemic. Some are enjoying it. I mean, we talked about the personality assessment, and there's some real strong introverts out there who are very happy to sort of stay cooped up at home and not have to face, crowds all the time. And then you get the people who are opposite to that. So everyone's coming from a different angle, and having those ways to keep it personal, anything from a little poll or a little survey, which hopefully you as an instructor can see that feedback right away and understand the different angles people are coming from, so that as you're delivering any material, you're able to talk about those. So even if you're not talking directly to the student, as you deliver that material, if they hear that, oh, that instructor realizes that someone may be coming from this background, and another student realizes, oh, they're coming from this background, they're going to be more engaged. If it's, you take the one size fits all approach, you're going to say, they don't know me, and they're going to immediately tune out. So those are the two things, like short little videos to capture people, but also that keeping it personal. Set up things with a small poll so that they feel like they've heard. People want to listen to others that feel like they've been heard by. So that was sort of the key thing. And that's why I try to set up the poll at the beginning of this to try to engage some people. Hopefully that worked a little bit. But I know sometimes we're limited in terms of how we can do that. But, that's, if you're going to spend any extra effort, that's definitely where I would spend it. Because I know you're obviously limited in terms of where you can put your effort in.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of the technical stuff that you probably have to look out for if you're using a tech-based resource. I know there's non-technical resource, but obviously this would apply to tech. Like we talked about different audiences, not everybody even has sight. So screen reader compatibility is pretty critical for that. And most of you working at larger institutions probably realize that your tech department may be all over this already. WCAG is just a term for accessibility, meeting accessibility requirements, whether hearing impaired, vision impaired, or other impairments. Multiple languages. Our material, while the main material of CollegeScope is really built in English because it's designed for American students, the assessments that I mentioned do come in multiple languages. Not everybody is English as their first language, and something like measuring things that are personal to them, that's much easier if it's done in their native language. So that can be critical in some cases. Also, having a reading level that's approachable. I know 8th grade sounds really low, but those of you working at community colleges and even any college for that matter know that incoming students very often can have struggle with the reading level, especially if English is their second language, actually. So we tend to come in at a lower reading level, even though the content itself is rigorous. So it doesn't mean that everything is Mickey Mouse in there. It is rigorous in terms of their learning and meeting those learning outcomes. Like I say, we really pay attention to those things. And then in college environments, you're going to get a wide variety of ages, everyone from, like, say, incoming people fresh out of high school all the way to adults who are retraining for their second, third, or fourth careers type thing. So just being aware of that, like I said, is important. Not everybody is a technophile, so having that integration with existing systems so that the person who's not comfortable with technology only has to learn one system is pretty critical. And we know that pretty much everywhere, if you're going through university, college now, you're going to have some technical ability to use some kind of technology. It's pretty much a requirement now. And same is true for the jobs after they graduate. So that's pretty critical. Any other questions? I really like that question before. You know, trying to narrow things down to one focus is important this time. Like you said, you have limited time and energy to devote to changing things up. So if, you know, picking one thing, that's a good question to throw out there. Any other questions?
I don't see anything at the moment.
Okay, well, I know we're going to share this recording out, and I believe there might be a way also, if you are interested in the CollegeScope resource that we have, or if you're interested in what it entails, even if you don't end up using it, but maybe you can find something comparable that just better suits your needs. This just outlines in more detail all the different things that you'd have here, everything from financial aid, you know, group dynamic theory, emotional intelligence, you know, gratitude, all those types of things that we know can be really helpful in the FYE space. What we include those and where they exist within our particular resource. But if you're using this just as going, you know, I need to find a resource that suits me, that this might be a good roadmap to say what kinds of things should I be looking for. And all these things have been vetted. So we've had CollegeScope out for about 10 years now, and we've already evolved it quite a bit. It's going into its 4th edition, but we do micro updates even in between editions and find out what's working. The nice part about having all this inside of a technology like we have it in, it allows for very detailed reporting. We know how people are interacting with it. We know the results of it. We've done case studies. And so we are constantly revising things to make sure everything in here works, has impact, and is received well. So use this as a map to determine what kind of resource you think will make the biggest or what will make the biggest difference with your students in FYE. Here's just some other things to look at. But anyway, this is more just to read on your own time. I don't need to read PowerPoint slides here. But yeah, any other questions, comments? Like I said, just to review the 5 key points that I mentioned in the beginning. Standards, consolidated resources, students can work on their own, student-centered. Make sure you keep it personal in some way, and make sure students are getting feedback very frequently on a consistent basis. And good feedback, not just good job, thumbs up kind of thing, things that feel particular. Like, hey, on this thing, did you notice that, you know, you mentioned this, have you thought about this? So asking questions back as feedback is also really good, a good way to provide feedback to students. Making them answer questions can get them really thinking rather than just giving them definitive statements.
Great. I don't see any other questions today, so I will thank everybody for their time, and thank you, Nick, for sharing this information today. Just as a reminder, the recording will be sent out by email tomorrow, along with some contact information if you did have more questions. And if you wouldn't mind, please take just a couple minutes and fill out a survey that you'll receive after this webinar so that we can see where we can improve. It's also another opportunity to enter any questions you have. Thank you very much and have a fabulous day.
Thank you, everyone.